Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 5th of January 2020. Ooh, scary to say that, isn't it? And I used to always find that even at school, it's amazing how something just could give you flashbacks to different eras. And I used to find it odd that we'd all, pretty well the whole class, would try and stay a year behind when it was as a change over time. You'd automatically put down the year as it had just been, and nothing really changes. I think there's probably trepidation in society, especially the way that we're managed and conditioned to live under forms of fear of one kind or another, mainly from government authorities, really. And there are agencies. There's lots of agencies working with government authorities, as you well know. Even newspapers are part of the structure. And years ago, I gave talks on that from different professors, including Quigley, who talked about the Anglo-American establishment and how they got Britain ready for World War II by terrifying the public that they're all going to get gassed, number one, by the Germans, and bombed out of their houses across the whole country. And to make the people, you understand, we're treated like a herd. And there's no time more obvious than even now, as we get the same repetitions of the same quotes, in fact, of the previous wars for the last 25, 30 years, really, all across the Middle East mainly, and parts of Africa too. But it's fascinating to see the same quotes, given to the public to terrify you, really, which was really meant to make you behave and knuckle down, as they call it. And it's so sad. Here we are in a brand new year again. It doesn't even feel optimistic, as we say. It hasn't been optimistic for a long time for most people, because we're in a stagnation mode, and it's intentional and it's managed. Folk have no idea how managed things really are. We think we're making our own decisions. We think that we're doing what we want to do, right down to even fashions. And I used to give talks on that because it is fascinating how every generation thinks this is their time. The youth are always used for big agendas, and they never know it themselves. They think they're making their own decisions, and they're given false leaders who are well educated, way above the average person they're going to lead, in fact, at least educated in their mission, which is to change society in a predicted manner for the authorities or for the elites. And nothing has changed there, except there's way more of them than there used to be, and awfully well paid, in fact, pretending that they're you. I can remember a long time ago when they used the pop in the rock industry as a form of revolution. And it was meant to be that. Of course it was. And Jerry Marsden, I remember him talking a long time ago, who had a few hits, and he had Jerry and the Pacemakers that were happy songs, the girl-boy type songs, and that was quite normal up until then. And he was talking about the change that came in with the seriousness with the Beatles and so on, when they started getting serious and political, and it changed everything. And the old fun stuff was tossed out the window, because after all, the society was to change. They didn't want boy-girl get married type of thing. They wanted they wanted dysfunctions in society to change it and to try to reduce marriages, etc. The communist idea, of course, communism, there's different fronts for the same thing, different terms but for the same thing, as you well know. But it is quite amazing to think that every generation, as I say, thinks they're doing their own thing. Nothing's further from the truth. Nothing at all is further from the truth. I used to wonder, even at school, looking at the old paintings of people who ran countries in Europe, including Britain too, who used to wear wigs and tights, tight silk stockings for the upper crust and so on. Vastly different, of course, from the majority of the people who were the working class, but the ones who ruled them with their buckles on their shoes and their silver stockings and their wigs and their handkerchiefs in there, tucked into their bottoms of their sleeves and all that. And they wore rouge and things, eh? And this is the manly thing. You say, well, wait a minute, who brought this stuff in here? Who brought it in? And a lot of it was brought in from France. It was way ahead of most countries at that time for leisure and lifestyles of leisure, as they called it. And unfortunately, the ones who ran Britain also adopted that too, that whole idea. And I'm sure too, they thought that they were making their own decisions and what they were going to wear. It's all laid on for you. I used to, when I was really small, I remember watching little clips on Mao Zedong, or you see him in newspapers with his blue tunic type outfit on, the collarless idea. It's very similar, in fact, to the Beatles uniform that they came out with. They were given too. They didn't design anything, of course, but part of their makeup too was to have this kind of outfit, the Beatles suit, that didn't have the real collar on it. With the Mao Zedong one was the one that Hillary Clinton likes to wear at times, even today. It's a collar that goes up, more like a priest collar, only it's just part of the blue outfit of the tunic, and had the blue pants on to match it. The idea, you see, under comradeship, everyone would be the same. And this would help to eliminate the class system. That's also why they pushed for the elimination of school uniforms, you know. And so you'd all be the same, basically. So you give you basically a tunic-type outfit to wear. And in the West, when I saw people who were older than me wearing the jeans, that was all the fad for the youth. And they had bell-bottom jeans too for them. But the fact they're jeans. And again, they were blue, kind of like Mao Zedong's outfit. And they even gave blue Levi-type jackets you could get as well. So your uniform really looked much the same as maybe a bit better made or whatever than the communist system. But folk never figured it out. They just wore it. You see, you'd buy it and wear it, thinking you're making your own decisions. You're trendy, you're in, and all that kind of stuff. But that's how it's managed. We're managed by big powers. And if you remember that the whole idea, and I'm sorry to jump into this just off the bat, I was going to say, y'all, first of all, I hope y'all go over your new year and didn't get too wasted or whatever you did, or ate too much, because you're liable to do that, probably now out of panic, because you really don't see much good coming down the pike, and it's like Groundhog Day, as I say. As we wake up to repetition of the wars with the same excuses by the same peoples and so on. But yeah, when you think about decisions and what you do and all the rest, you have no idea of the incredible powers at work to manage you all. And you think about even the computer. I mean, they used to joke at one time in the early sci-fis, well, early-ish sci-fis from the 1960s, you can see them, and sometimes 70s, and Britain did a few like that, where they'd have this alien creature that was like mainly a big brain and maybe a few tentacles coming out, but it was stuck in a big chair type deal. I thought as a child, I thought, you know, the authorities would be awfully happy to have us all stuck in chairs, because I knew already, and I knew enough of the war, the last war, that time it was World War II and then the Korean War. The authorities on all sides had restrictions on travel, as an example, and you were supposed to live in your own community. And in the Soviet system, that was really way ahead of its time with its restrictions and so on, and you must stay within your little community area. But they even had curfews on at night and things like that. And I thought, wouldn't it be, I guess their whole idea would have us all stuck in a chair. And some of the sci-fis, they had the withering away, even articles about it. Well, eventually our legs would wither away because you wouldn't be using them anymore in the future, because it'd all be brain power and stuff like that. And they're not too far off the mark, really. You look at back in the 70s, they had a big splurge of Japanese workmen's accommodation. They were like hives, just big buildings with crawling type places where you could sleep. There's their little bed, and their mats on the floor, and up in the corner they'd have a little TV, miniature TV set and so on. And these were set up for workmen at the time. And China probably had the same things too. And we all looked upon it with curiosity, wondering how folk can manage that. They said, well, these are workers, and they can be transient type workers, and working on construction here, and then maybe another city in a month or two's time. And so they set these things up for them. But they're all quite happy. They all said that they're really happy because they're little private compartments, even though you couldn't stand up in them. When you think about step by step, you're getting trained into these smaller and smaller units by our masters, of course, when you're in a socialist system, experts run your lives. But the intention is not to let you think that they're running your life. The whole point, you might react to it, you see. So that the idea is almost morphs, it morphs through the ether to you, through bits and bytes of information. And you're programmed. You are programmed to do what they want you to do and to behave the same way too. That's always been the goal, the ultimate goal of the true Soviet man, remember. The Soviet man and woman eventually wouldn't even have money. You wouldn't need money. That was the idea too. Credits might be the way, but you wouldn't really need it because you'd all be so well behaved, ultimately. There would be no greed because eventually all your needs would be supplied to you in massive warehouse type factory style stores, which we have now, of course. But this is way back then. They talked about it. They even talked in Marxism about having one factory that could supply the shoes for the whole Soviet system. Just one factory. Another factory could be built to supply all the light bulbs of the whole Soviet Union and Europe and so on. And you see, well, we gave it all to China. Huh? Do you think that was all coincidence or something? We make nothing here now. And what I'm saying is, there's nothing happens by itself. It's not just coincidence over and over and over. No, it's not at all. And above all the hubble bubble of toil and trouble, of wars and everything else, and economic crashes, etc., above it all, there's a global structure managing all of this. There really is. You're supposed to be kept down on a lower strata of understanding, just the basic fear mode of wars and Middle East and bombs and things like that. You see, that's where you're supposed to be stuck. You're not supposed to understand the higher stuff above it all. And you'll never understand anything unless you do. And you must understand that each time you want to go and do something, think, who would approve of me doing whatever I'm going to do, you see? And who would disapprove of me doing what I'm just about to do, you see? And just because you can't see people directly doesn't mean you're not getting managed by them. Of course you are. You're getting managed every day by them. If you're on the computer, for instance, you're being prompted of what to look at. You're being prompted what is a good person is supposed to be. And don't look at that. Oh, bad people look at this or whatever happens. You know, you're constantly being managed and monitored, of course. It's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing. Really. How easy it is to train the public to be what your elite want you to be. Now, for an example, in repetition, and because we're trained by repetition in a sense, when things work, and they do studies on everything we do and what we think and how we react to things, and they know what works on us, you see, behaviorists and psychologists, etc. Especially with the internet, in real time, they can put out fake or whatever meme they want to do and watch everybody react to it and chat and so on, and they do their instant studies by algorithms, etc., and they're pretty accurate in what works. But I was amused to see the same kind of rhetoric being used by Donald Trump, because it's written for him by his scriptwriters. Yeah. As it was, as the same things that Obama came out with too, written by his scriptwriters, and way back to George Bush with the Gulf War, well, with Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? and where the media had cleverly altered step by step. And it was a psychological operation, which was admitted later, by the way, massive scale. Once they got the war going in Afghanistan, which was on the list, of course, before it all happened with the Twin Towers, after a while they managed to, it took them a year to start to shift the sights for the public to think that Saddam Hussein in Iraq had something to do with it, which he didn't, of course. But what was interesting during the inquiry afterwards, once they'd put Iraq back into the Stone Age, which was the agenda, by the way, written, and I gave talks about it at the time, because I know that I read articles by Brzezinski, who had confabs with his pal Kissinger about it, and Kissinger said that the main intention for this kind of war against Iraq and other countries on the list, which is a peanut group, he said the main intention was to so destroy the nation of Iraq, as an example, that could never ever formulate again together as a nation. They would create so many factions afterwards, they could never really be a stable nation again. And then there'd be no threat to any particular country around them, basically. And that's never changed. That's what's happened to this present day. But what was interesting, during the inquiry afterwards, it was like a very informal inquiry about it, when they said to George Bush, why did you attack Iraq? And they said, well, you tried to infer. They said that you inferred that he was behind 9/11. And George Bush quite honestly said, when a few times that they're honest, when they're very cocky, he said, well, I never said that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with America being attacked. He said that he was just a bad man and the world is better off without him. And a big smile on his face. And you pretty well heard the same thing, the same type. See, these are psychological responses written by experts who just look up the book, up the manual, and what do you use in this circumstance? Well, you use this works with the public. And then you heard that just the other day there, after the US took out an Iranian military leader, and there's Trump saying the same thing. Well, he was a bad man, he's responsible for lots of death, blah, 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 and so on. So being a bad man, no judge, jury, or trial, nothing, being a bad man according to world leaders, remember, who've got complete militaries under their fingers, supposedly, and with buttons and all, but can just decide who's bad and all the rest of it without any kind of public inquiry, investigation beforehand or anything else, or judge, jury. It's just done. That should terrify people, but it never does really. Folk accept everything very quickly, most people anyway. And it's like deja vu over and over and over, or Groundhog Day. You just keep seeing the same things over and over again. The same tactics are used, the same excuses are used, because they're all from the excuse manual. It's psychological warfare operations. That's what you tell the public in this circumstance. They'll make it, don't get too elaborate with your reasons, because then you can shoot holes in why you did it. So make it very simple and as obscure as possible. Don't tell them much, you see. And that's what you get right now, because the object has nothing to do with just killing one person. You've got to look at the techniques of embargoes, right? The embargoes with Iraq before they decimated Iraq was bad enough, and they had Madeleine Albright and other ones on the head of the board at NATO, supposedly. Security councils, etc. And she was asked when they had an embargo and folk were starving to death and children were starving to death and they couldn't get medicines in or anything like that. They'd already destroyed, by the way, some of the big medical, pharmaceutical facilities already. All infrastructure eventually was to be just destroyed. But before they totally did it, they said that they tried to starve the folk into submission. Now, you think about, if you truly had a bad man, just running your country, how would you feel if some country starved you to death and all that? and stopped and literally didn't allow you to sell anything abroad to get money coming into the country to feed yourself. How would you feel if it happened to you because there was a bad man running you, Think about it. And so let's slaughter the whole bunch of the people because of a bad man and his little regime at the top who keep everybody suppressed, supposedly. That's what we're told. Even though Saddam Hussein at that time was a CIA asset, he'd been trained by the CIA, set up and put there by the CIA. And believe you me, that's a big warning to anybody who's used by the CIA. Eventually, they'll use you and use you and use you until you're expendable, and then they'll use you again by having you sacrificed. That's really what they'll do. You have no friends. You see, when the CIA comes to you, believe you me, the CIA has no friends. In fact, it's almost, to me, I like a child's mind in that children have an ability. I used to have an ability to see people. I gave a talk about that back in the 90s too. When you hear children talking about, like a wolf, they can see in their mind's eye a person as a child. You sense something. Like a dog will sense who's good and bad, and that type of thing. But children could do it too. They could sense some, and they don't have the vocabulary to explain why you don't like somebody so much, but it's a sense to get. So it's like a wolf or like a something or blah, blah, blah. Well, that's how you try and retain that. You should try and retain that forever through your life, because it's a survival mechanism for all of us. Not to be fooled by glib talking, whoever happens to be, professionals who want something from you, or they want you to do something. And you should never do it. You get a sense this is wrong. You get a sense and it's more than that. It's never been so blatant for those who want to know what's going on as it is today. And it won't last long, because censorship's coming down so fast, as we well know. But Quigley, getting back to Quigley on his talk about World War II, he said that all the media in Britain at that time, in the 30s, was owned by big power moguls who literally all belonged to the Royal Institute for International Affairs, this massive private club. That's the CFR in America, you see. And they decided to terrify the public, terrify them, so that they get ready. You're preparing the public to hate another country. You understand? Because they want you to eventually go and fight that country, and you don't know anything about it. But they've been preparing this for years. It's just that the cannon fodder are the only people who don't really know about it. So you must train the people who are civilians and they work in grocery stores and different things like that, and train them for what's coming along the pike that they don't know themselves. The people don't know. They're kept like children. But the ones above you are training you step by step to hate the enemy. You see? Before you even know that they are an enemy. But the ones who rule you certainly do know, and they want them eliminated. Nothing's changed. In fact, it's even more precise today with the techniques used with mass communication, right to your cell phone or right to whatever is your computer or your TV, You're all getting the same data at the same time, the same update, same programming at the same time in order to get you ready for something, you see. So you'll have the right response. Now, the right response is not turning your back and say, I'm not going to have anything to do with this war. The right response is going into a form of shock and fear, and I'll leave it to the professionals. You see, they must know what they're doing. They must have, because see, you wouldn't. It's like, I can remember where people in the past are often accused of coming out with certain kinds of statements and used, but you have to, often what they're doing is using other people's statements before them, you see. So you've got to really find out who really said it, and it's quite enlightening. It's often their enemies, but anyway, you'll find that Goebbels, for instance, in World War II Germany, he said that, and supposedly Adolf Hitler said it too, but they got it from previous people before him, but they said, if you're going to tell a lie to the public, right, to get them to do something, He says, make sure it's a big lie. Because everybody lies, you see. And right down to the innocent white lies. But everybody will lie. And people, because they lie, they can accept small lies. Oh, that's a lie by so-and-so. But if you tell them a real big lie that's got incredible consequences for everybody, you see, you wouldn't do that as a little liar. So you can't imagine anybody actually really going that far with a massive lie, because you wouldn't do it. And that's why they get away with it. And nothing's changed. That's really how things really are. Tell a big lie. And that's what you've had your whole life long, where it comes to war after war after war. Get big lies that are absolute nonsense. Now you have to really stand back and say, wait a minute here. Front people, like Bush, and every other one that comes afterwards, they're all bought and paid for because your country, you see, is conquered. But the public, again, are not supposed to ever figure that out. It's not good, knowing that you're totally conquered. You might get some real resistance then. And so you have to keep the sham going that somehow you're in a democracy, even if you're really in a republic, doesn't matter. But when you have the front man saying, it's a good thing, and we're better off without this person or that person, and they've just spent millions of dollars with either attack drones or something or whatever, just to kill somebody. It should be rather frightening, really, when you think about it, because we know we're not just going into a more tyrannical, controlled society. We're in it. But it's going to progress. Years ago, I imagined even having the little drones. I remember doing the articles, in fact, where the Pentagon admitted they'd paid millions of dollars for experimental tiny drones that looked like birds, for instance. They even showed you little clips and videos of experimental ones they had, little robotic things that they could spy on people, and that's what it was about. Some of them were like the vampire ones, little bats for more dusk-type scenarios or uses, and other ones were birds. They could recharge, just like your cell phones. Some of the cell phones now can do that by sitting on electric lines above the ground, or even telephone lines. They could actually recharge themselves off those lines by sitting on the electrical field around it. They had wonderful little things like birds that could follow you along the street and nick into the door if you're going into an apartment building just behind you, and even crawl on the walls and things like that. This is years ago they had this kind of stuff, you see, because the society you're going into, we are into actually, as I say, is a monitored, controlled society. That's the reason you were really given the computer, by the way. It wasn't to help you out. It was to completely monitor everybody eventually on the planet, except the ones who rule you. They've had exemptions from it. In fact, they have a different internet system, in fact. But for the rest of the public, you see, you've got to be totally controlled and predictable, utterly predictable. And so here we go, going through the next series of wars. To me, honestly, it's like a nightmare. I remember giving these talks so long ago, and it's just repetition, because it's the same list of countries that are to be taken out. So years can pass if they can't get their way. And I'm not going to give lectures on it, and I certainly could, but years have passed and they didn't quite pull it off in all those countries that were on the list of the Peanut Group. So they'll keep going and keep going. If it takes another 20 years to do it, they'll do it. They're determined now with Trump. That's why they put Trump in, by the way, if you didn't figure that out. They put him in to accomplish the task of the Peanut Group. That's why he's surrounded by the same people, basically, with the same mantras. And that's why you're hearing the same mantras, in fact. But it's the same bunch of countries. I can remember back when Iraq was attacked. And it was attacked and invaded, remember, by the US and Britain and a few other helpers and so on, but mainly the US and Britain. And it had not attacked anybody outside the US or that. It hadn't done that. It was all made up. Because they were on the list of the Peanut Group. That was the reason they were taken out. all the countries in that area, around that area, I'll say around, were to be demolished back to the Stone Age, as I said, until they could never get together as a formidable, coherent country that would pull together as a nation under times of stress and even have war-making abilities or even defense they could never even unify for defense if you create so many factions. Libya was on it too. Syria was on it as well. Yemen, and I think Sudan was on it too. And it was published back in the 90s, and then twice actually, and then in 97 it was published again. And then, of course, the Bush group with the same PDAC members that drafted it all up were in power by then, and away they went to war. And it takes all this time, they're still at it. Millions have died here, millions of people, you better say millions, when they starved, again with embargoes, which are hellish things. They stop you from importing, exporting, and eventually you can't even feed yourself and you starve. And you're supposed to just put up with it. Huh? This is supposedly is a more humane way of having a war, starve the folk to death. And what they'll also say is, well, you see, that's going to force the people to be destabilize their own country and overthrow the tyrant. You see, the tyrant being whoever happens to be running their country. Well, all I remember is you never heard much about Syria before. You never heard much about Libya, not really. A lot of rhetoric in the papers. It was good for rhetoric, you know. And you also had Iraq was fairly quiet for years, and it was all the different tiny little fractions that could explode were all kept under by strongmen, and that's how you kept them working. These countries working. You had to have a strong man in charge. And once you eliminate them all, well, look what happened. That was intentional, to destabilize them all. Not to help anybody, or help them, or the people. No, nothing to do with that at all, folks. No, not at all. We all know what's going on here. But I can remember Madeleine Albright, as I mentioned before, when she was asked on television that at that time, with embargoes on Iraq, before they went in to totally bomb it to the Stone Age, the embargoes alone, they said, this killed 500,000 people so far with starvation and disease, and they can't even get medications or even vitamins, And he says, is it worth it? And she says, oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. These are the psychopaths. And you should be very afraid of these characters. They remind me more of strange insects. An insect, you see, is programmed. It can't be any other way. An insect has no affinity for anything around it or anything it's going to eat, even other insects. It just does it. It's programmed. And that's what these characters, I can't relate to them. I really honestly can't. As being human. I can't relate to them at all. And if these characters are in charge over very authoritarian regimes, which are getting worse and worse, you should be very, very afraid of it and therefore stop it from happening, honestly. Because it's getting all around you now. And it never ends up nicely. It ends up as a horror show eventually. It starts off with, don't think this, don't say that. What made you ask that question? But, you see? That's how it all starts off. And then targeting different segments of society. And that's why the white folk are getting hammered right now. For what? For existing? Most white folk, honestly, are descending from people who never ever had it good at all. In reality, too, embargoes are meant to provoke the country, your target, into attacking, to break out of the embargo and attacking the ones who are causing it. The idea being to have your virtue as a non-aggressor. All we did was stop them from eating, and getting food in. That's all we did. So when a real physical attack happens against you, you can still stand up and say, well, we didn't want this to happen. We've tried other methods, meaning starving them to death. Think about it. What would you do? And this is what happened to Germany too before World War II. It may be a completely different outcome and no war at all. It had been concessions and all the rest of it. And don't forget that Germany at that time was put up there, even by Time magazine, as Hitler was put as Man of the Year, I think 1933 or so. So don't forget, you can goad people into absolutely desperate actions as well, desperation, and that's what's happening right now with Iraq. I can remember that, as I say, the first attack they had with Iraq, certain elements that would benefit from having enemies wiped out told the US presidents, don't stop there, go right across through Libya and into Syria. They were telling, this is in the newspapers, by the way. It was amazing to see the US being told what to do. And it didn't quite work out that way, so they had to go back to using proxy armies, mercenaries, financed, made-up mercenaries to attack Syria and in fact, to eventually take out Libya as well. And again, Libya definitely is gone. That's why you got so much migration, because Gaddafi did keep masses. That's what he said. If you finish me off, it's only a wall to stop Africa from invading the whole of Europe. That's what he said. And that's true. You have to look up, see what happened, and who was getting money to try to divert mass migration from going across into Europe. So they took out Gaddafi, guaranteeing that Europe would be completely changed forever. And that has happened, folks. You're looking at a chessboard here, but you just don't see the players, do you? But there's definitely players that are way above you, way above all this, making it happen. But anyway, the US is, here they go again, and so the same old thing. You embargo the nation, you force them to retaliate. You even goad them into it by bombing someone who was part of the militias to try and keep the stabilization process going inside Iraq. Iraq had invited them in, by the way. We've got to remember this. They invited some of the shite commanders in with their military to work alongside the militias inside Iraq to try to keep the peace. And then you go and so you guaranteed retaliation. That's what they're after now, is retaliation. And don't forget too, the US, and Trump said it too, with Syria, when they were supposed to have been pulled out of Syria. Oh, we've still got troops with the oil fields. We've still got the oil. Why is the US keeping a nation's oil supply from them? This is the nation's. That's part of the income to keep the country going. Do you understand what's happening here? It's plunder. Of course, it's plunder. How can you have the upper hand and be on the moral high ground when you're plundering across? I remember giving the talks when Tony Blair, the one-man band for international supposed socialism, wanted war in the Middle East with Iraq. I can remember it. And I remember warning people about, so that eventually you'll find out that they're going to be a big looting operation. And then a few years later, I remember reading the articles on the air where it was admitted. They always tell you a few years later, And the newspapers in Britain said that Tony Blair had invited some of the top moguls for the oil industry, the big corporations, in before they attacked Iraq to divvy up who would get which oil fields to themselves. They're a big looting organization. I mean, this is plunder, folks. It's plunder. Let's be honest. There's no moral high ground here at all. It's big business, and really, nothing much has changed. At one time, we thought with World War I and II, and then the Cold War, there was a moral idea to the forces. That's why guys would join the forces, because they didn't want a repetition of major world wars. And now you had the big bad bear looming at you, even though the West created the big bad bear from the start and funded communism and funded and fed them even after the Bolshevik revolutions. The best enemies that money can buy is or buy and create. Well, nothing's changed. And this is a sideline, the same tactic is being used with China. China didn't make itself what it is. We signed agreements. I remember giving the talks years ago on it, where we signed agreements. The politicians, they're not ours, let's be honest here. They're little nobodies, little puppets. But they signed all the agreements for free trade in the World Trade Organization and so on, with China, most favored nation trading status, where we'd fund them up. Our tax money would fund them. We'd put hospitals in. We'd fund even the governments even put ads out for the big corporations pretty well. They said, look, if you move to China, we'll fund your transfer. You're up when you move up wholesale from this country to China. We'll pay for you to move there, and anything you have to take with you, even you start your factories up. And then we'll train your people and pay your people to train the Chinese to take over eventually. I can remember, this was unbelievable what was happening. So quietly. It was published, but most people, you see, don't think. Brzezinski said it in his book Between Two Ages. He says the public shortly, this is the 1970s, he says the public shortly will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll expect the media to do the reasoning for them, and they honestly do now. The media is private, folks. It's not there to help you. It's always been politically employed by those in power to guide you along the path of least resistance for those who own you. Basically, that's what it's for. But the public do. The media will tell us what they worry about, don't they? Yeah, they often will tell you what they worry about, and it's generally nothing to do with you. But things you really should worry about, they ain't going to tell you. They're going to tell you at all. They all knew, all the big moguls. They're in bed with the top international financiers. They all knew that they were going to crash the economy in 2007 and 8, but they didn't tell the public. They got all their loot out of it. They made profits of it all. That's how it runs the world. The same gangsters that bring in the wars and demonize whoever runs little countries so they can loot them and to get them out the way, so that the people who think that they should rule the world should be able to rule it instead, you see. This is what's going on here, folks. But it's honestly a nightmare having the same dream over and over and over again. It just never ends. The same list as well. And I'm going to touch on that tonight, because time is going on, as I say, and I should really get on with it too. Now, I'll just touch on this one, right? And I said this before. I've told you, Iran's always the target, has been for quite a long time. And before Christmas, I mentioned it too. Around that period that Iran will be next. And I said too, the impeachment will go all quiet if Trump just gets the war started, because that's what he's there for. And you'll suddenly, like magic, you'll see all the media off his back and they'll start praising him. Because that's what he's been put in for, you see. Whoever does this job, as I call it, the list, is going to be the hero, you see, for those who really rule you. The impeachment trial in limbo as Senate leaders trade blows, it says. So there's a little clue there. And this is about Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, it says, of how they've made zero headway on designing a bipartisan set of rules for President Trump, his impeachment trial. In other words, it's stalling. This is the article. It says that it's stalling. Well, no wonder. If he does what he's supposed to be doing, you see, which is always a mystery to the public who are not in on it. If he does what he's supposed to be doing and what he got put in for, he'll be a wonderful guy. He will, honestly. And so that's on the cards, as I say. Now, I'll put up this article here. So many of the original articles are disappearing like crazy down the memory hole. And that's what the Internet's for, of course, is we'll put all your books you see on disc or PDF, and don't worry about it. In fact, don't even keep it at home, because put it all in the cloud and gradually everything gets censored off and down the memory hole. It's all worked out that way before you were given the computer, folks. There are an awful lot of nuisance books out there, you know. So here's an article here, Global Warfare. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. I've given this talk so many times before, I could probably do it in my sleep. But it says Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. So this was the video interview with General Wesley Clark, who was sent over there, remember? And even he's got a history too. You should really look into it. It came out afterwards when he ran for politics. They caused a bit of a stink. But anyway, it says that the interview serves as a reminder regarding the diabolical timeline of America's hegemonic project as Iran the next target to be taken out. You know, as I say, this is an old article, really put out again, originally published in 2007, about the list. But the list came from the Peanut Group from the 1990s. I'll say it again, you know. 7 countries in 5 years, that was the original plan. If they kept going, like I told you, the US was told to don't stop there with Iraq, they keep going right through all the way through into Syria and take them out too. But they didn't quite make it. But anyway, it says 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, right? Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. That's the list. This is from a talk that General Wesley Clark gave with Democracy Now! And the video literally, I'll put up a link, it'll vanish very quickly if you can copy it. If you can copy it and you're streaming, do so, because, as I say, things are just vanishing like you wouldn't believe, honestly. But that's how things work in reality and deception, eh? That's what intelligence is deception. I hope you understand that. And the first people who'd be deceived are their own countries, populations, so that you'll get on the moral high ground on board with your governments, folks, for what they implant you do. So here you go. I mean, don't forget, there's people heard this their whole life. They're not that old. Well, they're old enough, you know, from the 90s to the present time. This is all they've heard, the wars with these same countries, folks. The list. And it was no secret at the time who drew the list up. But also in this article is in print, right? On Tuesday, I interviewed Wesley Clark of the 92nd Street Y Cultural Center here in New York City before a live audience. So there's even a printout of what was said, if you can't get the actual video itself. And I know it will just vanish again, because every time I put these things up, they vanish, the actual videos. But anyway, what do you think of the generals who run for president? And Clark says, I like them, it's happened before. Will it happen again? It might, it says. It says, later in the interview, I followed up on that question. Will you announce for president? I haven't said I won't, because he was only run at the time. But they go through the list of countries, and he explains what happened to him, because he was given the list and told that they were going to take all these. He had no idea they were going to take all these countries, but he was given the list, and he was rather shocked. And he talks about this in his live interview at the time. And it's a keeper, folks, for those who want to understand what happens. What he tells you from a top general who was over there, right, leading armies, an invasion. You understand that it's very volatile. The different countries that he was attacking, if they knew who was attacking him, not just Americans, they'd be even more furious. It's astonishing what goes on, folks. The people don't know, or the public, they just never know what's really going on. I'll put that one up, folks. And then this one too. It's a good, simplistic in a way, but at least it's better than nothing at all. How controlled explanations are achieved, it says. I'll take stuff from anybody who's been involved in anything like this. I don't care who they are, as I say, but when it comes to how the mind works and how you're used and how psychological warfare works and so on, it says how controlled explanations are achieved. It's a good article on how the intelligence agencies that plan big events already have the explanations written up before they make the first move, you see, for the public. So this is how they call it controlled explanations. Like, and here's an example, before the dust was even cleared, within about 15 minutes of the Twin Towers supposedly being hit or whatever in New York City, 9/11, within about 15 minutes, across all the media, they had a top US politician saying, it was bin Laden, and that's all they heard. Bin Laden. No one says, how come you know already it's bin Laden, you see? Even though bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, he vehemently denied they had anything to do with it on the different videos that he put out himself. Doesn't matter, you see. You've got to get a reason to invade countries and destroy them. and loot them, right? It's big plans in there. And all the pipelines of oil and everything and gas they had planned for that whole region, all these different countries owned by about 2 countries that had nothing to do with them, were all drafted up there too. They showed you all these things. They're still going on today. All these countries that have demolished, they loot all the oil and gas from them. So I'll put that up anyway, because the time's getting short here, that particular article. I just want to mention too, the papers, as you've noticed, have Jeffrey Epstein's socialite, Madame Ghislaine Maxwell, being hidden from the FBI in a series of safe houses because of information she has on powerful people. But they're saying that she's possibly even in Israel. But I'm waiting for the movie. I'm surprised. I bet you anything, there's top producers working on it all. This will be a big. They might even do a book first. Most folk won't read it. You see, they want video today. They don't even want audio anymore because they need to get little pictures of cartoons in front of their faces and things. But really, that's how you're trained, folks. And if you can't sit and listen and use your own mind what you're listening to, you'll never retain it. Anyway, I'm waiting for the movie to come out. That'll be quite the movie, eh? It's got everything: sex, violence, extortion, blackmail, and a lot worse too. And yeah, what a movie, eh? Think about it. That'd be a blockbuster if you get the right people to do it. Also, again, impeachment trial in limbo as the Senate leaders trade blows, and they'll keep it in limbo. And if Trump doesn't get on with slaughtering and grabbing the loot in those countries for his masters, then he's going to he'll be in the bad books again. So he's going to get on with it. They've used proxy armies. We've trained proxy armies. We've funded proxy armies. It didn't work out too well. And now a lot of these proxy armies are across Europe living as refugees, supposedly, or migrants. And what a hellhole it creates, eh? And now you're going to get masses more migrants if Iran gets hit, obviously. Iran has been bringing people out for years now, because I wouldn't live in that country either when you know you're on the list. You've watched what happened to the rest of them on the list, eh? And then you have Iraq to reconsider working with US-led troops after the airstrikes. You understand that Iraq is supposed to decide itself what militia groups are going to help them, and they're employed. They employed the Iranian militia group that Trump's been blasting against international treaty and all the rest of it. Quite amazing, eh? What's going on here? But what do laws matter when you've got big, powerful interests with big propaganda specialists ready to get it going? Another one, too, is I put up the rockets land close to the US Embassy in Baghdad, no known casualties and so on. I could go even further, actually, with many. This is no time, but even in Britain, I remember giving talks years ago in Britain, because stuff was filtering out into some of the media at the time. It was bona fide, and they said that Britain was training guys who were born in Britain from some of these countries, the Muslim countries that are born in Britain, to go over there to be basically agents and work for the military over there. Then they come back home and it's all these problems. But the fact is, they create. You have no idea what goes on. You have no idea. For 30 years, MI5 had terrorist assets in Manchester and different places, which they trained and sent them over to those countries to act as mercenaries. And then you see them on television supposedly being anti-Syria or Syria, freedom for Syria, all this kind of stuff. No. These were trained mercenaries. Quite amazing. Yeah. And then you get blowback. They come back again and they're not too happy with you, and they've already tasted the blood many times, and it's no big deal to kill again, is it? Trump's own wag the dog is Iran hit job a distraction for impeachment lynch mob back home. I'm not really up on this article here, but it does go into the wag the dog scenario as a distraction. But really, I think that it's different. I think really Trump will do what he's told, or else he's going to have trouble. Turkish Parliament authorises Libya deployment. Well, here you are. I mean, now once again, next door to Syria, you're going to have more troops coming in with agreement of the US and NATO. Yeah? It won't stop there. This is going to go on and on and on. You know that. And lots of folk are going to get slaughtered again. Turkish parliament backs government plan to send troops to Libya in emergency session, it says. And Turkey sending troops to Libya would be no solution to the chaos caused by the 2011 NATO intervention. It wasn't an intervention. They bombed Libya into the Stone Age and looted it, naturally, to had massive gold reserves for the population, for pension. All disappeared, folks. All planned that way. Same thing happened, though, in Iraq, you know. They even had bets on the very ancient artifacts in the museum in Baghdad when the military went in. The military were told to stand round, and this other group moved in and stole all the stuff. That's a fact. I'm not kidding you. And ended up in private museums. Folk have no idea of the truth of things, you know. Once again, you'd never believe it because you wouldn't tell such a big lie or do such a terrible crime. A little crime maybe, you know, but not a big one. You know? And this stuff about the green zone and so on and around Baghdad, around the palace and all that, the old palace. That's sort of nonsense, folks. The US they actually built a massive compound in there. It was like 4 square miles, you know. Enough to house armies. That's what it was created for initially. And then when they handed it over eventually, after many failed handing overs, it's supposed to be back to Iraqi ownership, basically, as this proxy heads run Iraq right now. They're all puppets, of course. And the beauty here, Mike Pompeo, the man you can trust, right? The old CIA fellows. US does not seek war with Iran, says Mike Pompeo. That was in May 2019. Of course he did. You can look at that face, would you? Meanwhile, he's been busy as a bee back and forth with certain people across there, getting it all set up. Eh? Quite something. Eh? There's a face you can believe, eh? And what else have I got here? I'll put an article up too. I've mentioned it before. That Craig Murray, the historian, former ambassador and human rights activist, he really did put it out about the nonsense with the fake poisonings in Syria before they blamed Assad with, and I put up a couple of weeks ago an article too by members of the teams that were sent in to analyse this, and this is an official world team that's sent in under the UN to test the stuff. They didn't find evidence of the stuff either, but they couldn't believe that their own leaders were told to lie. Everything's politicised. You can't believe anything you read, folks. And then war again on the front burner. There's another article here too. This is a nonsensical statement below from the Pentagon announcing the US government had committed an act of war against Iran should frighten everyone. The strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans. It says, let's go and kill the folks and wait to see if they hit us back, eh? because they haven't been successful so far. They've starved them in the whole bit, and they've stopped them from selling any oil. But now that they've got little deals going on behind the scenes that China might buy their oil and stuff like that, well, you got to stop that, folks. You can't have them feeding themselves again, eh? And Trump ordered the assassination of Soleimani, and the Middle East prepares for possible war. Really, well, you'll pay for it all because we pay for it all, don't we? We pay for everything, and the big crooks end up getting all for nothing, and they get to loot it, and they get the oil and the gas and all the rest of it, etc., etc. So I'll put all this stuff up tonight. Sorry I'm rushing through it all, but as I say, it started off with just massive psychological warfare, right down to how you dress and why you dress the way you dress and all the rest of it without knowing really where it all comes from, including the massive tattoos that became an incredible fad over the last 15, 20 years. Just suddenly, but it's all from TV shows and so on, and folk, monkey see, monkey do, they say, and away they went. But same with pink hair and spiky hair and all the rest of it. It's all given to the folks, and they never really fathom it. They just adopt it, thinking, well, it must be normal because it exists. Pretty sad, isn't it, how we're so easily managed, especially when it's done so unconsciously, in a sense, by the majority of the public. We learn by osmosis. We don't really think things through. It filters through into us bit by bit and bite by bite, you might say, and digital formats today. Because folk don't spend the time to really look into much at all. That's the sad truth of all. They get bits and bites of headlines and things, and that becomes official stories for them. And even the psychologists and manipulators at the top and the behavioural insights teams that manages all through the internet know that. They know that through headlines alone, and a sequence of headlines, like a sequence of them, you'll come to a conclusion without even reading into the articles, just seeing headlines. No kidding. That's how intense it is. But I feel so sorry for people across the world going through the same stuff over and over again. And we've watched the total elimination of countries that were, you could even say they were not third world countries, they were up and coming and so on, and demolished. And all the resources stolen from them. And Libya had, apart from they had no debt, by the way, Libya. Everybody was pretty wealthy in that country. Totally, all their pensions, everything's stolen from them. Stolen. We even know who stole it. We know all that stuff. Sad, isn't it? But that's the system we're living in, and we're going to get more years of it now, because I knew it years ago when they put Trump in. I knew exactly why he was being put in there. I knew it would take time to get it all going. And that's how they've done it. You see, they haven't just gone off half-cocked. It's been planned for ages. The resources trained up. And don't think that they've got multi-thousands of troops over in different bases across the Middle East ready to go in. So don't think, oh, we're sending a few troops over. That's nonsense. They've been preparing for this for years. Anyway, there we go. I hope you all can survive what's coming up, and let's hope they don't crash the economy at the same time. I don't think they will. I've often thought that's the reason why they keep the US economy afloat, whatever there is of economy, because it's not a manufacturing economy anymore, because a whole bunch of corporations have their bases in America. Doesn't mean there's work. It might be great for the stock market, but it doesn't mean there's work for the people. It's not at all. I can remember when they used to call it a jobless recovery when Obama was in, and even before that the same terms were used in Britain when Blair was in. The jobless recovery, they called it, because corporations might make lots of money, but that's in the hands of a few. And the US literally is kept afloat by magicians who have magical accounting. But they'll have to get the job done with the wars before they'll eventually totally crash it. They might give you little minor crashes, but to totally crash it, you've got to get the wars done. And you think about it, the loot that will come out of all these countries, and already has come, going into private corporate hands and so on. But nothing goes to the taxpayer except the bill for all, because you pay for it. Sad to say, it's this repetition. Hell is repetition. Help me take along and keep going by donating. Remember, order your books and discs at cuttingthroughmedia.com. And sorry to start off the year with this, but what can I do about it? I don't make up the news, you see, and I don't create the bad stuff that happens in the world. So for myself, from Ontario, Canada, Alan Watt, it's good night to me, your God, how your gods go with you.